Huh? Okay, I guess it turned on. That was weird. It didn't give me my countdown. Let me make sure it's working here. Okay, I guess it's being recorded. Strange. Oh, no, 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 no. Okay, there you go. Sorry about that. Oh, okay, so this is Lessoncast number 2 for the material that we're using to talk about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Yes, I just opened up a Dr. Zevia for myself. Um, If you missed any part of these slides from yesterday, from this portion down here, so we got through pretty much all the idea of the three assumptions. If you missed any of this stuff, it's on yesterday's notes. Just go back and check real quick. But for now, let's jump into this part here. This is what we primarily covered today. So, in the opening statement of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson writes, "We hold these truths to be self evident, that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So let's look really quick at this because this is going to go into where we were talking about and what you guys did in the flipped lesson about the idea of context. A lot of people will throw out there that the Declaration of Independence is contradictory and hypocritical, because Jefferson states that all men are created equal, but many, if not most, of the founding fathers, and particularly Jefferson himself, were slave owners. And if they had these unalienable rights like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, why are you owning slaves? And the Constitution was created to empower these slave owners. Both statements are patently false, and you can determine that by looking back on the primary sources of the time. So here's just a couple things to keep in mind. The version of the Declaration of Independence that all of us are familiar with, that we looked at in school and that is available pretty much everywhere, is not the actual original version. In the original version, Jefferson specifically stated that slavery was one of the offenses that George III was guilty of. Now, it was removed by the Continental Congress because of objections from the Southern colonies. Now, yes, that means that there were people who supported slavery, and I'm not arguing that. But what you have to understand is the context of this. Now, let's follow that up with this. Even though people were slaveholders, none of them, well, okay, maybe like one or two complete whack jobs from the South, the vast majority of them never argued that slaves were people. What they argued is that they were not necessarily um, of the same advantage and the same privileges that the other colonists were. Now, keep in mind, this has very little to do. It has less to do with race and more to do with station in life. But continue on a little bit further. Let's move up a little bit. The Constitution itself at no point ever mentions the word slave. It uses the terms persons in bondage or persons in servitude. The reason for this, and ultimately one of the reasons why Jefferson more or less let go of it and was not like, you got to do this or whatever, there's an economy here. And this goes back to the economic reasons we talked about when looking at things as well. Look at the economics. Slavery was not profitable. In fact, by the time of the Constitution, most of the founders who were still there agreed privately that slavery would be dead within a generation. It would die off on its own slowly because it cost too much money to maintain slaves. And therefore, they felt no reason or need to address it. There were original proposals at the convention to limit the amount of years a person could be a slave and to automatically grant freedom after a certain point. This actually goes back to, if you remember originally, in 1619, when the first Africans were brought to America, they were not brought as slaves. They were actually purchased as indentured servants, and they were let go after a long period of time. That evolved over time. Why? Because of economic reasons. Just in the same way that given enough time, economically, slavery was going to die out on its own. What changed that was the unintended consequence of Eli Whitney's cotton gin, which was created, ironically enough, to actually end slavery. And instead, it actually made it more viable and profitable. So the point is that the founders all recognized that slaves were people, and they were created by God. The idea that they were subhuman only developed later as slavery became such an entrenched economic institution in the South. If things had continued as they were, it would have died out naturally on its own, probably by about the 1820s or 30s. So there you go. Now, going back here. So we've looked at why it was this assumption that slavery was automatically built into the Declaration and the Constitution was there to defend that principle. It wasn't. The unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this was not Jefferson's original idea. This was borrowed from an English philosopher named John Locke. The difference, if you guys remember from last year, is that this pursuit of happiness was originally property. And it really, I think, says a lot about Jefferson's views about property and happiness. People are free to pursue and use their wealth and their talents to go after what it is that makes them happy. And in many cases, this will be property. But it's a reflection, I think, maybe of a growing middle class that were not necessarily property owners or who were pursuing the ownership of property in the midst of other ideas and goals that they were pursuing. So when you look at this, he uses the word inalienable, he used the word self-evident there. Self-evident means that it's obvious. So it's obvious that all men are created equal and all men are endowed with inalienable rights. The fact that that language was not taken out means that most people, if not all of them, supported those concepts. Unalienable means that they can't be taken away from you. Why? Because they come from a higher authority. This goes back to the principle of subsidiarity from yesterday that's built into these documents. God gave you those rights. God gave you the abilities that you have. Truth says that they are real, they are unalienable, and they are obvious. They cannot be given or taken away by a government. This is why it is so important to understand back here again this principle of subsidiarity. If you truly follow this, God gives people rights and privileges and abilities. People create governments to protect those privileges and abilities. The only person who can take them away is God himself. Now, you can lose them through other means, like if you violate other people. But at no point in time is the government involved with the giving and taking away, because government only gets its power from people. What ends up happening is when you remove this portion here, when you take out the idea that there is a creator, it becomes one of two things: that rights and privileges come from people. Well, how do they do that? Because people create government that then gives you rights and privileges, so that the government is the source of rights and privileges. If the government giveth, the government taketh away. What's even more terrifying is if God is removed from the subsidiarity, what steps in to take his place? Well, on the far right, it's the person, the individual, and on the far left, it's the government becomes God, both of which are really messed up concepts. Okay. The last thing here to understand, and this, so what we're looking at here is going back to our sort of basic understandings. Okay. You've got the idea, again, the three basic understandings. There is a creator, there is truth, there is subsidiarity. Where do we see this? The fact that we are all created by a creator, we have an unalienable rights given to us by this creator. Truth and rights come from this creator, therefore they exist. And this idea that they cannot be taken away is the principle of subsidiarity, because the higher authority and power is not the government, it's the creator himself. There is an implicit recognition for the need for belief in morality and justice. I brought this up yesterday, and I'm going to reinforce this again today. Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin both of which who were very big forces in the creation of the Declaration of Independence, and Franklin in the Constitution was there as an advisor, were both agnostic deists. They believed in a higher power of some sort, but they didn't know what it was. And as far as church going, heck, Benjamin Franklin, for his moral behavior alone regarding his family relations, may have exploded if he walked into a church. I don't know. They weren't church going men. Franklin was actually a Quaker by sort of birth. Jefferson was at least theoretically, I believe, Episcopalian or maybe Presbyterian. Um, the point that I'm trying to go back here is this one down here. Even though neither of them were members of a particular religious group, and in fact, you remember Jefferson wrote a version of the Bible where he removed any reference to Jesus's miracles just to prove that it was just a philosophical work. They both understood that organized religion of any kind was necessary for morals and justice in society. Benjamin Franklin, especially, gave money to every single church in Philadelphia, every denomination. Didn't matter who you were. He gave money to everybody. He even gave money to Jews, which was like an unheard of thing. Everybody got money. Why? Because those organized religions provided the basis for moral thinking and right judgment in making laws. Both of them recognize that if you remove faith, church, synagogue, temple, call it what you want, mosque, you are not going to have morals and justice. What you will have is the changing views of the mob that is dedicated to whatever catches their fancy at the time. So, in order to understand the creation of both of these documents, there is this idea here that you have to have religion and morality. Again, they're not telling you you have to belong to a specific church. What they're telling you is that you have to understand and accept the fact that there's something above you, above government, and that thing above you and government is a creator, and that everybody has a right to a relationship with that creator to pursue their religious beliefs privately and publicly for the betterment of society. Okay, that's where we're going to end off with today. If you got any questions, bring them up and ask. Otherwise, I think we're done. Peace and love.